Hello, and welcome to this lecture on the commercial revolution, its causes and effects. In this lecture, we're going to look at how the age of exploration and business practices in Europe in the 14 and 1500s started this commercial revolution process. This is going to continue, honestly, until today. It helps establish and strengthen mercantilism, sets the seeds for capitalism, and fully begins Europe on its path to economic dominance that arguably continues today in many respects. So let's start looking at some of these slides. Here, I just want to kind of point out the trade routes that we see in Europe. We've talked about these to an extent. Again, a lot of trade goes through Italy, goes through the Middle East and Constantinople. Again, once 1453 hits and the Ottomans take over Constantinople, Europeans stop doing business with the Ottomans because they're against this Islamic empire, and they're not supportive of that. So trade over here gets kind of dicey. The Italians, still have some really strong trade supremacy in this region. But again, after 1492, we see Western Europe really start to kind of take control of trade, especially, and that grows and grows and grows and grows. The Hanseatic League up here, don't forget them. They mostly trade with each other. There's trade that goes inside of Europe, of course. You see trade flow from the north to the south. But we do see these Western European Atlantic-facing areas from France, Britain, the Dutch especially, and the Portuguese and the Spanish really kind of take control of a lot of this as the years go on. So let's look into see some of the factors that contributed to that. Looking at some of the causes and associated factors related to this quote-unquote commercial revolution, I just want to highlight some of the things the College Board wants you to know. And we're going to talk about almost all of these in further detail in future units, but you should know that kind of some of this stuff starts here in the late early 1500s and kind of continues on as the class continues on. So what allowed what funded these ventures outside of Europe into North and South America, Africa, and Asia? The big thing you should know right now is the Joint Stock Company. You've heard of these names. The British East India Company, the Dutch East India Company are just some of the big ones. These companies were established to fund these voyages. It was not cheap to fund a voyage to Africa or to Asia. It was not cheap to purchase enslaved Africans as property. It was not cheap, and it was risky to fund a voyage across this unknown body of water, the Atlantic Ocean, thinking you'd land in Asia, but instead landed in the Caribbean. To fund these ventures, you needed money and patronage, and the Joint Stock Company was one avenue to do that. You could, of course, get to know the Queen and King of Spain or some rich person like that. But for the less rich people, you could pull your money together and form a joint stock company. We see this happen in Britain and in the Netherlands. Merchants, people that have some money, but not quite enough maybe to fund their own venture, would pool their money together and pay for a ship, pay for the sailors, pay for the navigators, and chart a voyage. And if it was successful, it was relatively lucrative. You can make 100% of your money to 1,000% of your money back if your voyage returned. So people were really looking into this. This led to the rise of merchants. We're going to see this trend in this class. Business classes kind of becoming closely tied to governments and funding governments. This kind of starts in this period. You have people like the Fugger family, with Jakob Fugger being one of them, that really got close to monarchs. In some places like the Holy Roman Empire, which is Germany before it was Germany. It's not Italian. It's actually a German empire. In some place, to become the leader of the Holy Roman Empire, you would need money to buy off votes and the imperial voting system that they had established, which I'll kind of go into more detail next unit. So these German princes, to win their votes, you had to bribe them. and merchants had money for you to do that. In exchange, if you're Jakob Fugger here and you're giving money to some noble or to some monarch to get help them win some sort of imperial election, you in return would get mining rights or things like that. You get the ability to do business. Along those lines are the development of national banks. Again, if you're not going to form a joint stock company, you need a national bank, the Bank of Amsterdam, the Bank of England, these big banks that could fund ventures. They could fund other things such as city developments, which really don't happen too much until, later on in this class, maybe second semester. But these banks that we're seeing develop in certain parts of Europe could fund these ventures. They could loan out money, and then when these voyages from Asia, Africa, or the New World, Western and Southern America, when they returned, they would get a return on their investment. How do you keep track of the money? Well, this might seem kind of dumb, but new innovations in accounting, such as double entry bookkeeping. Believe it or not, this is a concept that the College Board wants you to know in AP Euro. Previously, before this period, it might sound kind of common sense to us, but previously in this period, accountants that kind of kept track of the books and things like that, would only keep track of deposits. They would only have one side of their books for deposits. They wouldn't keep track of deposits and withdrawals, or debits and credits. They would only keep track of one of them. So it's kind of astonishing. Look if you have access to a checking account or a savings account or something like that, you usually keep track of what money going in, money going out. That's how every bank account that I've ever had is set up. But back in the day, hundreds of years ago, it was just deposits, things going in. So they kept track of both of those. So you get a more accurate standardized process of looking at accounts. And with slowly but surely improving standards of communication, it's nothing really crazy in this period, by the way, but it does get better over time. You're having better people keeping better track of what's going on there, what's going on in bank accounts, and what's going on in the bank accounts of these merchants and of these joint stock companies, etc. We do see some big item things going on here, some big movements that are going on with this commercial revolution. Of course, like I said previously in previous lectures, mercantilism is growing and developing. Again, this is the idea that you're only as strong as your supply of gold and silver as a nation. If you don't have lots of gold and silver, you're a weak nation. There's trading with another nation, therefore, is dumb and stupid, because you could be giving them gold and silver. So you want to hoard your gold, hold your silver, and only sell things to other people. But if everyone's following mercantilism, no one's going to want to give away gold and silver, right? So you do trade and business with your colonies or with people that will buy from you. So tariffs, trade monopolies, colonization are all big parts of mercantilism, which stands for merchant capitalism. It's the predecessor to capitalism, which still is the dominant economic theory of today. We see the development and beginning development of the agricultural revolution. We're seeing places like England and parts of the Netherlands, the closing off of common fields or enclosure. We'll talk a lot about this throughout the next few units. And we're seeing different approaches to farming and farming technology. We'll talk more about this as time goes on, but that process is beginning in some areas. And finally, the price revolution. Again, with the 3 Gs, God, Glory, and Gold, one of the main focuses of this age of colonization is getting gold and silver and bringing it back to Europe. We do see the Spanish particularly successful in this regard in certain areas. For example, they strike a huge silver mine in Bolivia in the 1500s. This huge supply of metal, gold and silver, goes back to Europe. And just like today, as we saw when the COVID pandemic first began, when lots of money goes out into systems and economic systems, that causes inflation. And this really struck and hit Europe very, very intensely. not just in Spain, but throughout Europe. When people have tons of money and have lots of money at their disposal, they're going to be able to buy an increasingly large supply of goods. When merchants see their goods getting sold out quicker, they're going to realize they need to raise prices, or they're leaving money out there. If a guy with a ton of silver and gold comes to you, you're not going to sell your goods at the same prices. You're going to raise those prices because people have more money. So this causes inflation throughout Europe, causes increases in rent and food prices. With the increased inflation, governments are getting more money and borrowing more money, which is leaving less of a supply of goods and things out there for the peasants. So these rising prices hurt everyone, but mostly the poor peasants and farmers that had to deal with this price revolution, or this gigantic growth in inflation in the 1500s that again hit lots of Europe, but particularly Spain and that region. Effects of the commercial revolution. So you do see some changes that begin to develop. I didn't talk about it too much, but one of the main economic forces in Europe in this period was the Guild. You could think of it as some sort of trade union. It's kind of like that, but it's more of a way for artisans, which are people in cities that craft shoes, tailor clothes, make barrels, work with metal, iron, things like that. Guilds are specialized groups that really take a pride in their trade and in their industry, and put a lot of work into perfecting their craft. They work with leather, things like that as well. And if you're a guild master, you're going to be very selective in who you pick. You're going to pick the best workers, the best people that are going to follow what you have to teach them. You're going to pick an apprentice or a few apprentices and train them over years to make shirts, make shoes, work with leather, make horseshoes, whatever it is. And you're going to spend a lot of time on that, and you're going to get a name for yourself. Some of the well-known brands today, can trace their lineage back to these medieval guilds. So, the workers in cities really like, the workers that participate in guilds really like this process because it protected workers and their product. However, many people did not like guilds. If you are a gilded worker, a gilded artisan, and you kind of you have a lot of power over who can make what barrel, who can make what shirt, etc. So you're gonna have a lot of power. Everyone else, merchants, the nobility, monarchs, they're not always going to be as fond of guilds because they protect, they give some workers some power. So with that happening, we're going to see some challenge there. And we're going to see them eventually fade away. They're going to be pretty much gone by the time of the Industrial Revolution, when factories come around and could just make, almost like an infinite amount of goods very cheaply, very easily, and just dwarf what a guild could produce. You're going to see guilds mostly go away. And we'll talk more about that later. But guilds begin to fade as merchants and the rich get more power in Europe through this commercial revolution. Going along with that idea is the development of this new group, the bourgeoisie, coming from the word burger, which you may have heard in AP US history or other classes. The bourgeoisie is a new class. Prior to this period, you have, the ancient regime, which you may be familiar with, where you have, the king above everyone, then you have the nobles, the church on top, the church usually above the nobles, and then the peasants below. We do have this new group, though, kind of becoming more and more prominent in cities, in London, in Amsterdam, in Seville, in Lisbon. These bourgeoisie have more rights than the peasants because they live in cities, and they have usually sometimes more money as well. They begin to challenge people around them for more power, more influence. We're going to see this bourgeoisie grow and grow and grow throughout this class. And by the time we get to second semester, the bourgeoisie are going to maybe replace the nobility as the second most or sometimes most important political group in Europe. That's in part to the French Revolution and other things like that. But the bourgeoisie are heavily tied to the merchants and to these voyages that occur. They can fund or participate in these voyages to the Americas, to Africa, to Asia, or maybe even fund them as merchants. So they're going to grow in prominence in this period. Going along with that idea here too is the breakdown of the old order, of this feudal system that is going to develop and stay prominent until the 1800s in parts of Europe. That's going to start to go away, especially in urban areas. And that coincides with the growth of the bourgeoisie. Urbanization is going to grow in some areas, not widespread like we'd see during the Industrial Revolution, but to a minimal extent. Again, in places like Lisbon, London, places like that, they're going to get more urbanized as they grow to meet the demands of exploration, of the age of exploration. We are going to see some hectic times in the 1500s and the 1600s, to be honest. We'll talk more about these as time goes on. But we are going to see, the little ice age. There's a few little ice ages that happen in this class. One happens in the 1500s. And when times are tough, when, global temperature when global temperatures change, that causes crops to not grow at a normal level, which can then mean there's less food, which means people put off getting married and having kids. When times are tough, people get married later. We have this idea of, people in older times, hundreds of years ago, getting married, in their middle to young teens, having kids right away. That wasn't always the case. When times are tough and you can't afford to feed kids and a family, you're maybe going to put that stuff off or not participate in it. And that's what we see in times. Now you could run into, a teenage family of, young husband, young wife with kids. That wasn't, impossible. But overall, looking at big trends, when times are tough, people put this stuff off. When there's a price revolution, making the price of rent and housing impossible, people are going to put that off. Again, these are trends we're going to kind of see develop over the course. We're not done with any of these topics I talked about today. We'll talk about them, but this process does start with the age of exploration. So I just wanted to get this these pieces of information in there, and then we'll kind of expand on them later. All right, I will catch you in the next video.